When we eat glucose, glucose must pass from the digestive system into the blood, and then glucose must pass from the blood into the plasma through the plasma membrane to be used by the cell. So the pathway of the glucose that we eat goes from the digestive system, from the gut, into the bloodstream, and then into the cells. It has to cross the plasma membrane. This process happens by facilitated diffusion. That means diffusion, remember what diffusion is. Diffusion is movement of a molecule from its high concentration to its low concentration on its own, and that happens with glucose. So if there is a cell, and where can I draw this real quick? So there's a cell, and there is glucose outside of the cell. There's more glucose outside of the cell because we just ate. That glucose will naturally want to move into the cell by diffusion. However, it doesn't happen simply across the membrane of a cell. In the membrane of a cell, there's special doorways called transport proteins, and glucose has to pass through these transport proteins that are not normally open. They actually stay closed, so glucose cannot get through these transport proteins. Okay, so even though glucose is moving from its high concentration outside of the cell into its low concentration inside the cell, this process is called diffusion. Okay, and then because it doesn't cross the plasma membrane on its own, it has to pass through these proteins. This is called facilitated diffusion. Okay, and I always have pieces of food everywhere because of my baby touching all of my stuff. So I'm sorry about that. And back to the transport proteins. The transport proteins remain closed on the cells, and what happens is that there's going to be a hormone insulin, okay, and that's going to help these proteins open up. So in order for this protein gateway to open, we need hormone insulin. Okay, so insulin hormone, it basically what it says here, insulin protein increases the rate of facilitated diffusion, meaning that the glucose is passing through the plasma membrane to be used by the cell only in the presence of insulin. Otherwise, if there's no insulin, the glucose cannot get inside of the cells, and glucose stays in the blood. And if we measure the concentration of glucose in the blood of a person who is either not responding to the insulin or does not produce enough insulin, such as in diabetes type 2 or 1 respectively, and that person's blood will have a high concentration of glucose after a meal because that glucose is not being taken up by the cells, and the cells are actually starving because there's not enough glucose. However, there's lots of glucose in the blood. So let me go back to this picture right here. This is the scenario that would happen if there's no insulin. There would be lots of glucose around the cell in the blood, but no glucose inside of the cell because there's no insulin or the person is not responding to the insulin. So type 2 diabetes, meaning the person is not responding to insulin, and type 1 diabetes means the person is not receiving insulin from the pancreas. So the pancreas is not making enough insulin. Just to summarize what we learned in the previous videos about the carbohydrate metabolism, the oxidation of glucose to produce ATP is called cellular respiration. It's a process made out of 4 steps that involves 4 sets of reactions, and that is collectively called cellular respiration. And these sets of reactions require oxygen, they require respiration, they require breathing, and also these processes happen like partially on the mitochondria, the organelles of the cells that produce energy. Glycolysis is a process, a part of that first step of the cellular respiration. We're going to skip these specifics. Too much chemistry for now. And we're going to jump right into this is talking about mitochondria. The process that happens in the mitochondria is the last step of the cellular respiration, the fourth step of the cellular respiration. This is actually the second, third, and fourth happen in the mitochondria. So one mitochondrion has these 1, 2, 3, the 3 last steps, and glycolysis happens outside of mitochondria. Summary of carbohydrate metabolism. Okay, and now we're going to jump right into the glycogenesis and glycogenolysis and glycogenesis. Okay, so this picture right here summarizes how it happens in hepatocytes, the liver cell. So this yellow area is a hepatocyte, the liver cell. This is the glucose in the blood outside of the hepatocyte. It's actually purplish blood because that blood is partially deprived of oxygen. It's kind of like venous blood. And what happens is that glucose first enters the hepatocyte, the liver cell. Then through a series of chemical reactions, it is converted into glycogen. This process is called glycogenesis. This process is stimulated by insulin hormone. Here we go. Insulin hormone, okay, glycogenesis. Glycogen is stored in the liver cells, and when the body needs glucose, this glycogen can be converted back to the glucose through a series of chemical reactions, and that glucose can be released into the blood and used by the body cells. This process is called glycogenolysis, and this process is stimulated by the glucagon hormone and also epinephrine hormone. Glucagon produced by the pancreas, and epinephrine is produced by the adrenal gland. It's an adrenaline hormone, just a different name of it, and insulin is also produced by the pancreas. So glucose can also be formed from proteins as well as the glycerol portion from triglycerides. As well as the glycerol portion of triglycerides. So basically proteins and fats, so protein and fat can be converted into the glucose. This process is known as gluconeogenesis. That's not gly, there's no Y, there's U, so that means glucose. And which hormones stimulate this process? Hormones called cortisol, produced by the adrenal cortex of the adrenal gland, glucagon, produced by the pancreas, and also thyroid hormones, produced by the thyroid gland. They stimulate glyconeogenesis. Here is the summary of the carbohydrate metabolism. So to make glucose, this is the hepatocyte liver cell. They can make glucose. They can make it from lactic acid. Lactic acid is actually a product of metabolism of the muscle. So if muscle is very active, there's going to be like a little byproduct produced there called lactic acid. So lactic acid is just a general product of glucose metabolism. So when glucose is used to make ATP in the cellular respiration process, there's going to be a product produced, lactic acid. That product is sort of a waste product in a way, but it can actually be used to make glucose through a series of reactions. Certain amino acids can be used to make glucose, and glycerol that comes from fat can be used to make glucose. This is called gluconeogenesis. So there's 3 ways to make glucose from 3 different types of molecules. So glyconeogenesis stimulated by the cortisol and glucagon primarily. Also thyroid hormones, of course.